Watershed-friendly gardening to me is gardening that just goes with nature. So you're planting plants that want to live in certain areas instead of fighting nature.
The magic of seeing a hummingbird come into your garden when you have something like a cardinal flower, it's so amazing.
Welcome back to Watershed Matters, the podcast where we talk about how local actions can help impact and protect our land and water. I'm Lucia Middleton, Water Policy Associate at the Watershed Institute.
And I'm Sophie Glovier, Chief of Strategy and Program at the Watershed Institute. Lucia, I want to start with a question today. Have you noticed that in the past year or two, there have been fewer butterflies?
More like the past 4 or 5 years. Yeah, I've definitely noticed, especially compared to when I was a kid.
I was doing some research for this podcast, and I knew that populations of butterflies and birds had been falling. But according to a study in Science magazine, we're losing about 1% of our butterflies, or there's a 1% reduction in butterflies every year. And that adds up over the past 20 years to a 20% reduction. And a lot of that is because of habitat loss. But I think the exciting thing, and what we want to talk about in this podcast, is something we can all do on our own properties to mitigate that, which is using native plants.
I want to bring in a quote from Doug Tallamy, who's a pretty well-known American conservationist and entomologist. He is quoted as saying, "As gardeners and stewards of our land, we've never been so empowered to help save biodiversity from extinction, and the need to do so has never been greater. All we need to do is plant native plants."
I really want to pick up on that. The need has never been greater. I think we just heard some very scary statistics and also just the ease of planting native plants. So I'm really excited about the conversation we're going to have today and the guest that you're about to introduce.
So I'm really excited to talk with our guest today, Brittany O'Donnell from Brittany O'Donnell Garden Design. She is a fantastic landscaper who has worked with us on a variety of projects. She actually participated in our very first green infrastructure training and has since then done a really impressive amount of work. She also did work with us on our very own Kate Gorey Butterfly House, as well as a variety of other projects across our watershed in central New Jersey. So welcome to Watershed Matters.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Brittany, we're calling this episode Watershed-Friendly Gardening. When you think about that, what does it bring to mind? What should we be doing?
Watershed-friendly gardening to me is gardening that just goes with nature. So you're planting plants that want to live in certain areas, native plants that are going to thrive in the areas you put them in, instead of fighting nature. So that's what it is to me. So whether it's a wet location, a dry location, there's a native plant for that spot, and also just creating spaces for more habitat.
So I think we should start with some basics. People use the term native plant frequently, but can you just tell us what that actually means?
So a native plant is a plant that is growing here naturally. So if you walked, in a field, you would see that plant growing naturally. But you also would see invasive plants. So I know that can be, a little bit confusing at times. But it's a plant that's from this area, that was not brought in from another country. It was born here and living here.
And what I think is so fascinating is that these native plants evolved with the insects and the birds and everything else that has been here a long time.
Mm-hmm. Correct. And then we're not going to have all these birds because some birds eat only certain insects. So when you start bringing in the native plants into your yard, you don't see the insects as much, but you'll start seeing the birds, and that can let you know that those insects are living there.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I recently learned that a pair of chickadees to raise a clutch of chicks needs, I believe, 6,000 to 9,000 insects. Yes. So that just gives you an idea of the scale of life that you need in your backyard to be supporting your bird population.
I know, and it's hard to believe that we are, supplying that to them when you see them living in your yard.
Yeah, I'm curious now. What is your take on a monoculture of a grass front lawn? Because I know a lot of people, that is what they aspire to do. They put pesticides into the ground to make it be a nice, uniform, fluffy green area. But for us, me from the watershed flooding side, like that is actually an impervious surface. So when you do have a flood, that also runs off. So how does that interact and differentiate from a more wider variety of a native garden?
Well, the more diversity, the more insects you're going to have. So I think everybody wants a little bit of lawn, but if you can start to reduce that and have start having planting beds, decreasing the lawn and having planting beds, you're going to have more insects. So I don't think we need to get rid of all the lawn. I think it depends on the property, the size of the property. And then, you go from there, like seeing what people's needs are for a lawn area, whether it's they need a place for the kids to play, or they're wanting a patio space. But the more natives you bring in, the more positive it is to me. So if you're going to have some lawn, but you have all native plants in your beds, then, you're really doing good. And I do see people, all of my customers, they want native plants, or they are, excited to hear why they should have them, whether it's for maintenance reasons or, to increase the insects and the bird population.
So Brittany, I want to ask you, do you have, tell us your personal story. How did you fall in love with native plants and what kind of brought you to this work?
Well, when I was little, my friends always laugh at me when I tell this story, so I'm hesitant to tell it all the way. So when I was little, my neighbor was really into gardening, and I spent a lot of time back there with her, helping her in her garden. And then I started going to school for occupational therapy. When I was volunteering, I didn't like it, but I was working at a garden center at the time. So I changed my major to horticulture. 10 years after working at the garden center, started my business. But only 5 years ago, that was when we got certified in stormwater management. And that's what made me start using native plants, because we had to use them in the rain gardens. And when we saw how they were functioning in the rain garden, whether they were in the bottom where it was getting really wet at times and then really dry, or up on the edge where it was always dry, we knew we just had to change to using native plants. And I'm not getting any younger, and I love to have flowers in my yard. So I've converted most of my gardens to native plants. The maintenance is just so much lower.
Okay, there's so many things I want to unpack in this, but I think we should stop and define for people, what is a rain garden?
Yeah.
Okay. A rain garden is a depressed area. It's going to have what we call a ponding depth. So that's an area that can hold the water. And then about 18 to 24 inches of bioretention soil, which is a very sandy soil mix. Some houses, they're required to have it. Their downspouts run directly into it. So it can hold that water, get all the pollutants out from the rainwater that's going on the roof. And it's reducing it from going into the water.
And so just explain to us, why are native plants so important to a rain garden?
They just are workhorses,
And their roots are super long,
yes,
right?
Yes, their roots are long, so they're very deeply rooted, and they can actually just clean the water. They can take the pollutants out and help absorb the water as well. Whenever we've installed one, I usually get a call in the evening when it's raining, and they tell me that the rain garden has water in it. And then they call me the next morning and they tell me, I can't believe it, the rain garden doesn't have any water in it anymore.
Sucked it all up.
Yeah, the plants just suck it all up. They're so amazing. I really didn't know anything about what native plants could do, like how great they were, until I did the stormwater management program here.
So we get a lot of calls from people who have problems with flooding in and around our area. And a lot of times we'll hear that they've lost a lot of trees, or they've decided to take trees down, and then all of a sudden they have a problem. So if somebody has a part of their property that's flooding, or they have water problems, what are some of the first things you would suggest that they do?
Well, planting is key, But also just, you want to look at the slope of the land and the location. If you're out in the country and, you have a little more flexibility. My designer, Erin Ingwerson, she lives on a slope and she built a beautiful bioswale. Her sump pump was running twice a day. She had two sump pumps running all the time. And after her bioswale was installed, the water, they stopped running. So, it's definitely looking at the location. If you're in town, you just want to do the best you can to, contain the water. It might not be, perfect. You might not be able to contain all of it, but you can definitely contain some of it, and you need an overflow. So it's very different depending on the situation, but there's always a easy solution, in my opinion, and it involves, changing the grade of the land and planting.
Well, and I think we should stop and define bioswale. Can you do that?
Bioswale, to me, basically, it's just a swale that you would put in a swale and a berm, and then you plant the swale very heavy with plant material and the berm as well. And the plants are going to control erosion, and the ones on the bottom, besides controlling erosion, they're also going to do the job of absorbing the water.
So I also want to call out the role of trees, especially native trees, because, and I guess I'll focus on oak trees, because oak trees are just an amazing species. Sometimes we call them a keystone species because they support so many other species. So planting an oak tree really is going to provide habitat and food for literally hundreds of species. But these trees are also pretty amazing in how much stormwater they pull up. And we've had so many challenges to our trees in this area with invasive species like the emerald ash borer. We're losing a lot of trees. So I think that is a big thing that we also need to focus on.
Yeah, I'm wondering too if you saw anything about young growth versus old growth trees, because oftentimes in a development, in a town, they'll be clearing out a bunch of trees to build a building or what have you. And they're like, no, but it's okay because we're going to be replanting this certain amount of trees, 30 oaks, 40 maples, what have you. But in actuality, a lot of the benefits you get from trees, including, of course, carbon dioxide emissions and all that, doesn't happen until they've matured. So like 20 years down the line. So I'm curious what you've experienced with that, like your thoughts on that.
Well, we tried to start planting before the more mature trees need to be removed. So, we're always looking at that, like looking at the health of the existing trees. And if it's a new development, almost any tree there is going to die within 3 years after construction. So, but I guess it would be hard if they could leave some trees and start to replant. That would be ideal. But, if they are really big trees and they're close to the house, and it can be difficult for them to take them out. But yes, in a perfect world, let's leave some of those trees during construction and start to replant.
Yeah.
I want to be sure we give people some specific suggestions. I want to hear about some of your favorite plants. So maybe give me an example of one of your favorite plants that is very likely to bring butterflies into people's backyards.
I love Amsonia, but that's a May-June bloomer. Phlox Gina is number one. I have a video of my garden, so that would be number one that you'd have to have, but it's not deer resistant.
And if you had to pick a favorite tree, what would your favorite tree be?
I don't have a favorite tree. I like diversity when it comes to trees. I want, a mixture. I do really like the native dogwood tree, but I don't know if they're liking the hot summers we've been having. I have some that are 3 years old, and I planted them really small, and they're doing great. But I feel like when I'm planting bigger ones and they're in more sun, they're not really, I'm usually losing them, unfortunately.
I think that's really important is the more you know about how a plant would occur naturally, the better you are equipped to put it in a place that it's going to like and flourish. So I think traditionally dogwoods have been what we would call an understory tree, right?
Yes.
They would have been planted underneath other trees. So you wouldn't necessarily put it out all by itself in the center of your yard with no other shade.
Yes, correct. And red buds as well. That's another beautiful tree, but they're, a little more of an understory tree. If you wanted to plant red buds though in the sun, I had a customer that insisted, and I do love them. So I love red buds. So I did a little research and it said if you water them when we're having a hot spell, that they'll be okay. But, we're trying to plant so that people don't have to water as much. Plant, the right plant for the right location.
Yeah, going off of that, is not obviously there's so many people that don't have access to green space or don't have a backyard or don't even have a front porch. They might live in like an old apartment building or something like that. What, in your opinion, are things that people could do to make maybe their windowsill or something like that more friendly towards attracting like a native butterfly or a native bird? But besides the bird feeder, which would be the obvious one for attracting the birds, besides the bird feeder.
I guess you could plant a plant like mountain mint in a planter. That's very hardy. Also, there's dwarf blueberries that are really pretty.
Oh.
So, and they look nice, definitely three seasons. So, you could do a nice little planter, even if it's just with mint and blueberries.
And these plants you can buy at like a local nursery, right?
Definitely.
Okay.
Yes.
You don't need to like travel high and wide or go to a mountain in upstate New York to go and get these blueberries.
No,
Okay,
most
that's
places
good.
will have it. I'm sure even, just our local places around here would have them.
So in terms of finding out what's native to your area here in New Jersey, I can recommend a website called jerseyfriendlyyards.org, and they have a great list of native plants that you could take along with you if you were going to a garden center. Something I did want to ask you about, Brittany, is about kind of what's called a cultivar. I think you would describe a cultivar as a native plant that has been modified a little bit, maybe to be a little showier, or some changes from how you might find it in nature. And how do you feel about that kind of cultivar versus a real genuine native?
Well, I always say when I'm planning a garden, the number one, it has to live.
That
Has
would
to
be
do
ideal.
well. It has to be able to live. Number two, the customer has to like it. And number three, I want it to be native. So that's my order when I'm trying to pick plants for a job. So I do like the cultivars because it lets me use more natives. I know some people are really against them. But if I want to use echinacea in a garden, maybe the one that grows 36 to 40 inches of purpurea, maybe that's not a good option because it's a small space. So then I can use some of the other varieties. But I do have my favorites. I know the ones that are going to do well. So I'm not just reading a description and picking a plant.
I also want to recognize that many local land trusts also responsibly collect and propagate native seed. So in our area, would like to call out DNR Greenway Land Trust Native Plant Nursery, because that's another option, both to be supporting the real local genotypes.
Okay. Yes, that doing, the seed collections. We do seed collections for one of our customers that has quite a few native plants on their property. And they are trying to do a meadow in their community. So we're collecting their seeds for the meadow.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about maintenance a little bit. I know you referenced that one of the reasons you really like native plants is because they're so much easier to maintain. And I think people love to hear that. So tell us a little bit more about why that is.
Well, when we install a garden with the native plants, we have an option of buying them in plug trays. So a plug tray, I always say, think about a tray of marigolds. So there's going to be 50 small little plants in there. And we're going to plant them 18 inches apart. So that's going to cover the ground well. The first 3 years, there's space between them. It takes about 3 years for them to fill in completely. So the first 3 years, yes, there is maintenance. You have to weed. But after that, I only weed my gardens 2 or 3 times a year. So it's so, to me, it's so much lower maintenance, and you're not cutting back. You want to leave everything up as much as possible for the winter. You don't have to shape things. You're not going in and trying to like prune boxwoods to have, like a round, structure plant in there. I like to have a little bit of structure in my garden. I would say I'm kind of a tidy gardener. So I like to go through my garden like mid-June, and I weed between the plants. So this way I like to have a line and keep it separated. Like it's a garden, it's not a meadow. But I mean, I have a meadow at my house, and obviously I don't do much with that. But with my garden, I want things to be in their own space. So it's once a year doing that. And then keeping up with the weeds. So like I said, I'm only weeding 2 or 3 times a year at this point.
And tell me about mulch. I know it's springtime. There's that smell. Everybody's putting down mulch.
Yes.
How do mulch and native plants relate?
Well, we want to mulch at first. It's going to help keep the weeds under control. But in a perfect world, we don't mulch our gardens until late May, till after Memorial Day, because at that point, an established garden is only going to need edging and mulch on the edge. Or if you lost, a plant and you have open space, then you can mulch that open space. So very little mulch. I love seeing the reduction in mulch I'm using for clients. I have some really big properties that I've probably have used like 40 yards of mulch at one point, and we're using 10 yards of mulch.
So for those people that might not know, like, why is it like good to use less mulch, and why do you think people to begin with are so inclined to use a lot of mulch? Because my Target nearby, they plant all their trees and their bushes, and it's a mountain of mulch. No dirt to be seen, just mulch.
It's really not good for like the trunk like of a tree to have the mulch up against it. Mm-hmm. But also a lot of the natives are going to seed in. So if you cover it with mulch in April, they're not going to seed in. So, I'm sure there's other, reasons, like just mulch next to the trunk of any plant isn't good, not even next to a perennial.
Especially if it's too much of it.
Yes, exactly.
Do you think that's making up for like the poor soil quality or something? So that's them trying to cover up maybe the deficiencies in the original soil?
Mulch isn't, I think they're doing it just for aesthetic reasons. They think it looks nice. It's just,
tidy.
It's tidy. And, people just aren't, giving it a chance to let the areas fill in before they're putting the mulch on it. Because if everybody would just wait a little bit to mulch, like even at Target.
Yeah.
Because I know they will try and do natives there. Like they'll have Roost grow low, which is a ground cover shrub. And that really would fill in, and they wouldn't need to put mulch there. It's just what we're used to doing.
Yep.
And, if we could just start to think about things a little bit, you could see just a cost savings, number one. I feel like I'm a little bit older coming into like the native planting. Like my designer is 7 years younger than me, and her reasons a lot are very like environmental. Yeah. I started, getting more into the native plants. I'm like, it's easier.
I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah. And it's cheaper in the long run. And as a business owner, I can install all these gardens, and the maintenance isn't as heavy. So, the way I can set my schedule up is a little different now. It's like, okay, in the fall, I'm going to have a lot of help for planting. So we can do tons of planting in the fall now, because a native garden doesn't need anything after, September.
I love that people come at this native gardening for so many different reasons, because for me, I love what it brings into my garden. I love the color, but I also love that I know that if I plant native sunflower, for example, I'm going to see goldfinches. The magic of seeing a hummingbird come into your garden when you have something like a cardinal flower, it's so amazing. I love the May apples, which is something that's called a spring ephemeral, which comes out at this time of year. So it's just interesting how natives have lots of stormwater benefits, as Lucia was talking about. And also there's some maintenance benefits. And then there's just kind of what we call here at the Watershed, a joy of nature benefit.
Yeah. And my husband and I we do really enjoy the wildlife that it brings. He's an electrician, and he will bring me out to the garden to tell me to listen. You have to hear this. And we're standing next to Aster, October sky, and the bees are just going crazy in late September, October. So yes, we definitely, I started for one reason, and definitely it is the, environmental benefit, like the ecological benefit, that is really exciting now.
And I think something that goes with this is thinking about no pesticide, no fertilizer, and even something as simple as thinking about the lighting in your garden at night. I've been reading about fireflies and the decrease in fireflies, and they need, for example, they like water, they like decomposing old wood, and they get very confused when there are the lights on at night, which is also a problem for the birds. So I think so many different little changes that we can make in our own backyards.
Yeah, and this is why green infrastructure was brought into law in New Jersey, right? Like if you build a certain size of project that requires a certain new amount of impervious surface, you need to use green infrastructure techniques, not just because it's environmentally friendly, but because it's also one of the most practical and effective ways of managing your stormwater. So it's all these things at once. And I'd like to add too that hearing all this about how much hardier native plants are, and that it still does require maintenance, but lower level of maintenance, is great for people like me. I killed an aloe plant once. Aloe plants are very hard to kill. Okay. So for people like me who cannot build a garden to save their lives, it's very nice to hear that even someone like me could put a plant outside, and it's likely to survive because it is adapted to the outside world and people like me.
I want to ask about some people, because they're so busy, are having help with taking care of their garden. So if you're someone that really wants to start on this native plant journey and be taking care of your yard in an environmentally friendly way, what do you think is the best way to kind of talk to your landscaper about that and partner on that?
I think that you need to really get out in your garden yourself and see what's happening. I have a suggestion of what I'm suggesting to my customers, the schedule that I need to keep. It's going to be a little heavier in the spring, and then back off in the fall. I'm sorry, when we start to get into July, but the spring months are very important. So I don't know if I have a good answer to that. I think it is people, getting out in their yard and, paying attention that after their maintenance crew was there and they weeded, look at it a week later and then a week after that, and start to see how often, how fast the weeds are coming back. Because sometimes it might look scary to see a maintenance contract for a year, but it's not going to be the same amount every month. If it's taken care of well early in the spring, then it's going to reduce in the summer months and the fall. So I don't know if that's a good answer. I think that's just how I feel about it, is people maybe getting out there and noting, making notes in their garden, and then they can see what is if anything has a fungus, just kind of having a notebook, and just checking in on things every other week.
Well, Lucia, I know you've been working on our landscaper training. And so what we've really been trying to do is make sure that people understand the reason and the why for why we're promoting native plants, and some of the things that Brittany's been sharing about how best to take care of them.
Yeah, that leads very well into my follow-up question for you. So here at the Watershed, we have done a wide variety at this point of green infrastructure training for landscapers, because we identified that as a communication gap when the state was trying to implement more green infrastructure. And something that a lot of these landscapers were concerned about was how do they approach their clients about these new practices that they've been learning? Because at the end of the day, they are the middleman, and sure, you understand that role very well. So I'm curious I'm sure most of your clients at this point are probably knowledgeable of green infrastructure, but if you've had clients that were not aware of it at all, what are your main like elevator pitch or main points that you emphasize when you're trying to like tell them about why green infrastructure is important?
Well, they don't want to use chemicals. So that's number one, is just showing them that, we should be, using native plants and green infrastructure, whether it is like a bioswale or if they're having like some water issues, how it can, reduce cost in the future.
Yeah, costs.
Yes. So I think that's usually my selling point, is showing them how we're going to reduce cost in the future.
Yeah, that is the main one. That does end up being the straw that broke the camel's back. Yeah.
And then most of the time, once we do start to, put some native plants in there, they start to see, all the different insects and the birds, and then it's just in all the beautiful flowers. So then it's usually that easy, honestly.
Oh, well, that's good. Yeah, because I don't know, as like the average lay person, I guess because I know I associate like a very beautiful garden that's with very high maintenance, that's super manicured.
Yes.
I don't know if people maybe think that native plants tend to be uglier per se, or like more scroungy looking or something, but then we do have a lot of native plants that are beautiful and can look, add so much dimension and color to your garden.
Yeah, we've done rain gardens for customers that wanted a more formal look. And, it's a really fun challenge. And there definitely can be, there's native plants that have structure, like Ilex glabra and Baptisia. They're nice and tidy, and just using them in a mass and repeating them. We still get diversity, in the bottom of the rain garden with irises and different sedge grasses. But, so it's many different styles, that we can do with the native plants. So I will, like, going into a meeting, I will try and have my iPad loaded with pictures. If I know like the style that the customer wants, I'll try and have a phone conversation before the meeting. So even if they're not calling me for a native garden, I'm going to pick native plants. And I can definitely pick ones that will fit their style.
So I would say that you might have native plants in your garden that you might not even know are native plants.
Yeah.
I read a study recently that people now can identify hundreds of corporate brands, but maybe 10 to 12 trees, for example. So there's some great apps. I personally like iNaturalist, where you can go out and just start to understand what is in your garden, what's native and what's not. And then to pair that maybe with a visit to a website to take a look. And many of these websites will tell you what butterflies or birds these plants will attract into your garden. And then that could inform your trip to your local garden center.
And most of the local garden centers now, they have an area set up with native plants.
And I want to highlight some resources that we have here at the Watershed Institute. We have a program called River-Friendly, which gives you information not only about working with native plants in your yard, but other things like reducing your pesticide use and other tips. So you can find that at www.thewatershed.org/riverfriendly. And Lucia, we have a green infrastructure training program coming up, don't we?
Yes, we do. It is on June 17th, and it's in partnership with another great green infrastructure company called Chesapeake Bay Landscaping. So it is for landscapers or people who work in DPW or just any sort of park or outdoor maintenance who want to learn in more depth about how to build a rain garden or green infrastructure, how to maintain it. It will be on Wednesday, June 17th, and it'll be an all-day training.
Well, Brittany, we can't thank you enough for coming and sharing all of your knowledge. And it's a great time of year to get out and put some plants in your garden. We'd love to hear from you about natives you select. And we hope you have a wonderful summer full of sightings of beautiful butterflies and birds in your backyard.
Thank you so much for coming, Brittany.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to Watershed Matters by the Watershed Institute. Watershed Matters is supported by a generous grant from the Kent Fields Foundation. Join the movement, share your story, and keep the water and the conversation flowing. Learn more at thewatershed.org.